The sun was a white, burning coin in the sky, baking the earth of the Lone Pine Ranch until it was hard and cracked. 10-year-old Clara stood at the kitchen window, watching the heat make waves over the empty land. Her father was out fixing the windmill again, his back bent against the glare. It was so quiet. The only sounds were the flies buzzing and the tired sigh of the old house. Clara was supposed to be cleaning her room, but the world outside felt too big and lonely to ignore. She filled a glass with water, the coolness feeling good against her palm, and walked out onto the porch. The wooden planks were hot under her bare feet. She was looking at the dry creek bed when a flicker of movement caught her eye. Down by the far fence line, near the cluster of thorny mesquite, something was moving slowly. It wasn't the quick scamper of a rabbit or the graceful trot of a deer. This was a painful, dragging sort of movement. Clara squinted, holding a hand over her eyes. It was a dog. A big dog, with fur matted with dirt and burrs. It would take a few steps, then stop, holding one front paw up in the air. Even from this distance, Clara could see it was hurt. The dog was alone, a tired-looking creature moving through the empty afternoon. She knew the rules. Her father's words were clear. Wild animals are not pets, Clara. They can be sick or scared, and a scared animal is dangerous. You stay away, you hear me? He said it to protect her, and to protect their few animals. Life on the ranch was hard, and trouble was something you didn't go looking for. But seeing the dog lift its hurt paw, seeing its head hang low, it didn't look scary. It looked thirsty. It looked the way Clara felt sometimes on the long, hot afternoons when there was no one to talk to. She watched as the dog sank to the ground in the thin shadow of the fence post, its sides heaving. The decision clicked inside her like a puzzle piece finding its spot. She wasn't going to touch it. She wasn't going to get close. But she couldn't just watch. Clara slipped back into the house. She took the big, chipped blue bowl from the sink, the one they used for popcorn on movie nights. She filled it to the brim with cold water from the tap. Then she looked around. She needed something else. Her eyes fell on the clean laundry piled on the couch. She snatched up one of her old aprons, the one with the little strawberry pattern that was now faded. Without a second thought, she tore a wide strip from the bottom, holding the heavy bowl carefully in both hands, the cloth strip tucked under her arm. She went back outside. Her heart was beating a little faster now. She walked across the yard, the dry grass tickling her ankles. The dog saw her coming. Its head lifted, and its ears went back flat against its skull. A low, rough sound came from its throat. Not quite a growl, but a warning. Clara stopped. She was still a long way from the fence. This was close enough. Very slowly, she bent down and placed the blue bowl on the ground right inside the property line. The water shimmered, a tiny pool of coolness in all that dust. She took a few steps back. Then, remembering the cloth, she gently laid the strip of apron fabric next to the bowl. "It's for your foot," she whispered, though the dog couldn't understand. "It's just water." She turned and walked back to the house, not running, but walking steadily. She didn't look back until she was safe on the porch. From there, hidden partly by the rocking chair, she watched. The dog didn't move for a long time. It just watched the house, watched the bowl. The minutes stretched out. A crow called somewhere. Finally, the struggle in the animal seemed to end. Thirst and pain won over fear. It pushed itself up and limped slowly, slowly toward the fence. It ducked its head between the wires and came onto their land. It went straight to the bowl. It drank in long, noisy gulps, water sloshing over the sides. It drank until the bowl was almost empty. Then it turned its big head to the piece of cloth. It sniffed it once, twice. Then, With a surprising gentleness, it picked up the fabric in its mouth. It didn't chew it. It just held it, looking for a moment toward the porch, where Clara sat perfectly still. Then, with a softness that surprised her, the dog nudged the empty bowl with its nose before turning and limping back through the fence. It disappeared into the scrubland, the strip of strawberry-patterned cloth still in its mouth. The yard was empty again. The blue bowl sat by the fence, a quiet secret under the huge sky. Clara felt a warm feeling spread in her chest. It was a small thing she had done, just some water and an old rag. But it felt big. It felt important. When her father came in for dinner, sweaty and tired, he asked about her day. "Nothing much," she said, pushing her peas around her plate. "Just watched the clouds." She didn't mention the dog. Some secrets, the good kind that make your heart feel full, you keep to yourself for a little while. That night, as she fell asleep, she didn't think about the quiet or the heat. She thought about the dog and hoped its paw didn't hurt so much anymore. The morning after the dog visit began like any other on the Lone Pine Ranch. Clara's father was the first one awake, as always. He shuffled into the kitchen in his socks, the floorboards creaking their familiar song under his weight. He put the old coffee pot on the stove, the clang of metal on metal, the first proper sound of the day. He stood by the window, waiting for the water to boil, his eyes automatically checking the sky. Would it rain today? The sky was a clear, hard blue. No rain. Not for the 100th day. He was about to turn away when a movement down by the east fence caught his attention. A coyote, maybe? Or one of the Johnsons' cows had gotten through the broken fence again. He squinted, leaning closer to the glass. What he saw made the tiredness fall from his body like a dropped coat. It wasn't one thing. It was many dots all along the eastern fence line, sitting as still as fence posts themselves, were dogs. He counted them quickly, his mind sharpening with a shot of cold alarm. 9, 10, maybe a dozen. They were of every shape and size. A big, shaggy creature that looked like it had some wolf in it. A smaller, terrier-like dog with one chewed ear. A few lean, rough-coated hounds. They weren't moving. They weren't barking. They just sat, facing the ranch house, spaced apart like soldiers on a watch. His heart began to hammer against his ribs. A pack, a wild pack on his land. His thoughts exploded into worst-case scenarios. The chickens, the new calves, Clara playing outside unaware. Fear, thick and hot, flooded his mouth. This was a rancher's nightmare. He moved quickly and quietly back into the hallway. He opened the old wooden gun cabinet. The sound of the metal latch clicking open was loud in the quiet house. He took out his rifle, his hands moving by memory, checking to see it was loaded. The weight of it was solid, familiar, and grim in his hands. "Dad?" The small voice from the hallway made him jump. Clara stood there, her hair messy from sleep, her favorite blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She was looking at the rifle in his hands, her eyes wide and confused. Morning wasn't for guns. "Clara," he said, his voice low and tight, "you stay right inside. Don't you move from this spot. You understand?" "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice small. "Just stay here." He turned and walked back to the kitchen window, rifle held down but ready. Clara, ignoring his command, crept to the edge of the doorway and peered around the frame. She saw them then. The dogs, a whole line of them in the golden morning light. For a second, she felt a pinch of her father's fear. It was a strange, scary picture. But then her eyes, sharp and young, found the one at the center. It was bigger than the others, sitting tall. Even from this distance, she could see the cleaner patch on its front leg where the thorn had been. And beside it, a tiny spot of faded red against the dust, the strip of her apron cloth. "It's her," Clara whispered, more to herself than to her father. "Don't be silly," her father said, his eyes scanning the pack, looking for a sign of attack. "That's a wild pack. They could have rabies. They're after the chickens or worse." Clara took a small step forward, her blanket trailing on the floor. "She didn't bring them to steal things, Dad." He glanced at her, his face hard with worry. "Then why are they here?" "You tell me that." Clara didn't know how she knew, but she felt it deep in her bones. The dogs weren't leaning forward. They weren't barking or snarling. They were just watching, waiting. It was the same way the injured dog had watched her yesterday before deciding to trust the water. "She brought them to show us something," Clara said, the idea forming as she spoke the words. Her father let out a short, frustrated breath. He loved his daughter's kind heart, but right now they needed practicality, not fairy tales. He looked back at the silent animals, and that's when he saw it. As he stared, the big lead dog, the one Clara had helped turn its head. It didn't look at him. It looked north, up along the fence line towards the back pastures and the cattle pond. Then, as if on a silent signal, every other dog in the line turned its head too. All of them, in one smooth movement, looked north. It was so deliberate, so unified, that it froze the man's thoughts. This wasn't random. This was communication. He lowered the rifle a fraction, his brow furrowed. What in the world? He followed their gaze, scanning the northern stretch of his land. From the house, he could see the dusty track that led to the pond, the clump of cottonwood trees, the old tractor tire. Nothing seemed out of place, but the dogs kept staring. "Stay in this house," he told Clara again, when his voice had lost its edge of panic. It was now a voice of caution. He opened the front door just enough to slip out, leaving it slightly ajar. He stood on the porch, the rifle now clearly visible in his hands. He wanted them to see it. He wanted them to know he would protect his home. Not a single dog growled. Not a single one stood up. The big one glanced at him, then looked north again, and let out a single sound. A deep, round woof that carried on the still morning air. It wasn't a bark of aggression. It was a signal. Then the pack moved. Not towards him. Not towards the house. They stood up as one and began to walk calmly along the inside of the fence line, heading north. They were flanking his property, moving with a quiet purpose. The lead dog reached the corner of the chicken coop and stopped, sitting down again. The others spread out around the small, wire-walled building, forming a loose circle. They settled into the dust, their attention now fixed on the scrubland beyond the coop. Clara, her face pressed to the window screen, understood before her father did. They weren't surrounding the house. They were surrounding the co-op. They were standing guard. Her father, standing alone on the porch with his rifle, suddenly felt like he was the one who didn't understand the language of his own land. The fear in his gut was slowly twisting into something else, a deep, wondering confusion. What did these animals know that he didn't? The silence on the porch felt heavy now, filled with questions instead of fear. Clara's father stood very still, the rifle hanging loose in his hand, its purpose suddenly confusing. He watched the dogs. They weren't looking at him anymore. Their attention was locked on the scrubland beyond the chicken coop, a tangle of brush and shadow that marked the edge of his cleared land. A wild pack sitting politely in his yard was one thing. A wild pack forming a guard detail around his chickens was something else entirely. It made the skin on the back of his neck prickle. Animals didn't act like this. Not unless they knew about a danger he couldn't see. He had to know. "Clara," he called, his voice low. "You stay on that porch. Do not come off it." He stepped down into the dirt of the yard, moving slowly toward the northern fence line. He kept a wide distance from the dogs circling the coop. As he passed them, a few flicked their ears in his direction, but none moved. Their job, it seemed, was to watch the outside world, not him. He walked past the old tractor. Its red paint faded to rust pink and followed the fence toward the cattle pond. The morning sun was getting warmer. Crickets sawed in the grass. Everything looked normal, peaceful. Maybe he was going crazy. Maybe the heat and the worry of the drought were making him see things that weren't there. He was about 20 paces from the pond when he saw it. A patch of soft earth near the water's edge, where the cattle came to drink. The mud there was usually churned up with hoof prints, but pressed deep into the black soil, clear as a picture in a book, was a different print. It was large, round, with 4 distinct toe pads and no claw marks. A cougar, a big one. His breath caught. He knelt down, his fingers hovering over the print. It was fresh. From last night, maybe early this morning. He looked up, his eyes scanning the area with new urgency. There, caught on the barbed wire of the fence a little further down, was a tuft of tawny fur. And a few feet away, another print, heading away from the pond and toward the thick brush where the land rose into rocky hills. The dog hadn't just been hurt by a thorn. It had been running from this. The pack hadn't come for food. They had come because they knew. They knew a hunter had moved into the territory. A hunter that threatened their own safety, and, by strange extension, the safety of this place where one of them had found kindness. He stood up, a cold understanding washing over him. The chickens weren't just chickens to a cougar. They were an easy meal. The calves, even bigger prey. The dogs, wild and smart, had recognized the boundary of this ranch, the scent of people and smoke and other animals, and they had seen the cougar's interest. They had also seen the girl with the water bowl. The calculus in their animal minds was a mystery, but the result was sitting right there in his yard. He walked back, his steps quicker now. He saw his ranch with new eyes, not as a fortress, but as a place full of vulnerabilities. The chicken coop wire was old, weak in places. The pen for the 2 young calves was just simple poles and rope. It was all enough to keep things in, but not enough to keep a determined, hungry predator out. Clara was still on the porch, her small hands gripping the railing. "What is it, Dad?" "Cougar," he said, the word short and hard. He came up the steps and leaned the rifle against the wall by the door. The weapon for a stampeding bull or a rabid fox felt wrong for this. This was a different problem. He looked at his daughter, then at the dogs. The big one, the leader, was watching him. It saw the change in his posture, the way he had left the gun behind. The dog's tense shoulders seemed to drop just a little. "They're not here to cause trouble, are they?" Clara whispered. "No," her father said, his voice thick with a feeling he couldn't name. "No, I don't believe they are." For the rest of that day, a strange new routine settled over the Lone Pine Ranch. The man worked, but his work had a new focus. He dragged old sheets of tin to reinforce the bottom of the chicken coop. He found a set of battery-powered lanterns in the barn and strung them up on poles around the small pen, their light weak in the daytime, but promising brightness for the night. He checked every latch and gate dot, and through it all, the dogs kept their watch. They didn't beg. They didn't come close. They moved in shifts. A few would get up, stretch, and wander over to a spot of shade under the big pine tree that gave the ranch its name. Others would take their places. The lead dog rarely moved from its post near the corner of the coop. It was like they had appointed themselves sentries. Clara, with her father's permission, filled the big blue bowl with water again and set it in the shade by the porch steps. She added a second, shallower pan. Later, she brought out the scrap pot, the leftover bits of food from supper the night before, and emptied it onto an old cookie sheet. She set it down carefully and went back inside. From the window, they watched. The dogs didn't rush. They took turns. One would amble over, eat or drink quietly, and return to its spot. There was no fighting, no growling. It was orderly. It was respectful. As evening came, painting the sky in oranges and purples, the man felt a nervousness return. The night was when the cougar would hunt. He turned on the lanterns. Their glow created small pools of light in the vast darkness, making the ranch look like a little boat on a dark sea. He and Clara ate dinner at the kitchen table in silence, both of them listening to the night sounds. The usual chorus of crickets and frogs was missing. The land was too still. It was the quiet that happens when every other creature is hiding. Then it came. From the hills to the north, a sound cut through the silence like a knife. It was a scream, high and rasping and full of wildness. The cougar's cry. Clara jumped, her spoon clattering against her bowl. Her father's hand tightened around his coffee cup. Before either of them could move, another sound answered it. Not one bark, but a dozen. A deep, thunderous chorus erupted from the yard. It wasn't the frantic yapping of small dogs. It was a full, roaring, unified alarm. The pack was on its feet, every dog facing the direction of the cry, their voices blending into a wall of sound that filled the whole valley. The man ran to the door and threw it open. He saw them then, not as a group of strays, but as an army. They stood shoulder to shoulder along the fence, barking relentlessly, proclaiming their presence. Asterisk, we are here. This place is protected. Keep moving. Asterisk, the cougar's cry did not come again. The barking continued for a full minute, then slowly died down to a few low grumbles, then to silence. The dogs sniffed the air, circled their posts once, and settled back into the dust, their job done. The man stood in the doorway, the night air cool on his skin. He looked at Clara, who had come to stand beside him, her eyes wide with awe. He didn't need a gun in his hand. The ranch had something better. It had a warning system with sharp ears and loyal hearts. He closed the door gently, and for the first time in many nights, he didn't feel alone in the dark. And the quiet that returned after the barking was deeper and more peaceful than before. The cougar's scream was gone, and it did not come back. Clara's father stood in the doorway for a long time, just listening to the night. He could hear the soft shuffle of the dogs as they resettled, the sound of one of them lapping water from the bowl by the steps. These were the sounds of guards, not intruders. He closed the door and looked at his daughter. Her face was pale, but her eyes were shining. They told it to go away, she said, and it wasn't a question. They sure did, he replied. The words felt strange in his mouth. He was a man who dealt in facts, the price of feed, the depth of a well, the weight of a calf. Talking about a pack of wild dogs giving warnings felt like stepping into one of Clara's storybooks. But he had heard the cougar. He had seen the prince. The facts were leading him to a very strange, very real conclusion. The next morning, things were different. The hard knot of fear in the man's chest was gone. When he walked out onto the porch at first light, he didn't look for the rifle. He looked for the dogs. They were still there. But they weren't sitting in that strict, watchful line anymore. They were sprawled in the cool dirt under the big pine tree, a tangle of legs and tails. Some were sleeping deeply. Others just watched him with calm, tired eyes. They looked worn out, like soldiers after a long battle. The big leader dog was sitting up, watching him. The strip of strawberry cloth was lying in the dust beside her got. The man made a decision. He went to the barn, to the back where he kept the spare lumber and old tools. He found a sheet of plywood that was warped, but still solid, and 4 short posts. He carried them out to a spot near the pine tree, not too close to the house, but not too far. A place of their own. Clara came out, still in her nightgown. "What are you doing, Dad?" "Building something," he said. He worked for the next hour, sinking the posts into the ground and nailing the plywood on top to make a simple, slanted roof. It wasn't pretty, but it would block the sun and the rain. Clara understood. She ran inside and came back with 2 old horse blankets that were worn thin. She spread them out on the dry ground under the new roof. The man then went to the feed shed. He didn't have special dog food, but he had oats and some dried meat scraps for making soup, and yesterday's leftover cornbread. He mixed it all in a big 5-gallon bucket with some warm water from the tap, making a thick, mushy stew. He carried the heavy bucket over and poured the food into 3 long, shallow metal pans he normally used for drip pans under the tractor. He set the pans under the pine tree, a good distance apart so no one would feel they had to fight. Then he stepped back. He and Clara went inside to eat their own breakfast. Through the window, they watched the slow, careful ceremony begin. The leader dog got up first. She walked to one of the pans, sniffed it, and began to eat. Only then did the others stir. They came over, 1 or 2 at a time, choosing a pan, eating quietly. There was no snapping, no rushing. It was the quietest meal the man had ever seen a group of animals have. That day, the ranch returned to its normal work, but the normal work felt new. The man went to mend the fence by the pond. Clara helped by carrying the smaller tools. As they worked, a shadow fell across the ground. It was the small terrier-like dog with the chewed ear. It didn't come close. It just sat down in the shade of the post, watching the brush line. A little later, one of the lean hounds appeared near the cattle, lying down as the cows grazed, keeping a sleepy eye on them. The pack wasn't just staying. They were working. They had assigned themselves jobs. In the afternoon, Clara sat on the porch steps, drawing in her notebook. The big leader dog came closer than she ever had before. She stopped a few feet away and sat, looking at Clara, then at the empty water bowl. "You want more water?" Clara asked softly. She got up, filled the bowl, and brought it back. This time, she didn't retreat all the way to the steps. She held it out. The dog took 2 slow steps forward, closed the gap, and drank. Clara could see the healed pink skin on the dog's paw. She slowly reached out her hand, letting it hover near the dog's shoulder. The dog stopped drinking, but didn't flinch. She turned her head and nudged Clara's fingers with her wet nose. It was a cool, gentle touch. Then she went back to drinking. Clara's father saw this from the barn door. He saw the trust in the animal's posture and the joy on his daughter's face. A name popped into his head, one that fit. He didn't say it out loud, but he thought it. Thorn. Because of the thorn he'd pulled from her paw with his pliers that morning, finding it stuck deep in the pad. And because she was tough, a survivor. By evening, the ranch was calm. The man sat on the porch, a cup of coffee in his hand. Clara was beside him, telling him a story about her growing. The dogs were everywhere and nowhere. One by the co-op, one near the barn, a few under the new shelter, already asleep. The man realized he wasn't listening for strange sounds anymore. He was listening to the sounds of his ranch, which now included the soft sigh of a sleeping dog and the contented click of claws on hard dirt as one made its rounds. He looked at Clara. "You know," he said, his voice low and thoughtful, "that first bowl of water, that was a good thing you did." Clara smiled, a small, proud smile in the fading light. "It was just water, Dad." "No," he said, looking out at the shadowy forms under the pine tree. "It was an invitation, and they decided to accept it." He finished his coffee. The sky was dark now, dotted with stars. No cougar screamed. The only bark was a soft, single woof from near the chicken coop, a check-in call from one sentry to another. It was the sound of safety. It was the sound of their ranch, not just as alone anymore, but shared. It felt right. It felt, for the first time in a long time, complete. Time on the ranch began to move to a new rhythm, marked not just by the sun and the chores, but by the quiet comings and goings of their new family. The pack didn't leave after the cougar threat was gone. They simply relaxed into the land, as if they had been waiting for a sign that this was the place to stop. The man found himself learning their names. Not names he spoke out loud, but names in his head based on what he saw. There was Scout, the lean hound who always trotted 100 paces ahead whenever they walked to the back pasture, his nose to the ground, checking the trail. The small terrier with the chewed ear became Digger, for his sudden, furious bursts of digging after gophers along the fence line, keeping the burrows away from the foundations. A quiet, thick-furred dog with a solemn face took up a permanent post by the barn door and became Watch. He rarely moved, but his eyes missed nothing. And then there was Thorn, the leader. She was Clara's shadow. Where the girl went, Thorn was never far behind, walking a few steps to her left or right, a calm, protective presence. The man saw it one afternoon when Clara was collecting eggs. A rooster, feisty and proud, flapped up at her, spurs out. Before the man could even take a step from where he was mending a saddle, Thorn had moved. She didn't bark or snarl. She simply placed her large body between Clara and the rooster. A low rumble in her chest, so deep it was more a vibration in the air than a sound. The rooster stalled, puffed its feathers once, and then strutted away, defeated. Thorn looked back at Clara as if to say, "All clear," and went back to her spot in the sun. The ranch itself seemed to change with them. The man hadn't realized how much energy he had spent just being watchful, just waiting for the next problem to come out of the hills. That tension was gone. He could work on the broken windmill and know that Digger was patrolling the yard for snakes. He could focus on the accounts in the evening, hearing the comfortable thump of Watch's tail against the barn door outside. The dogs had divided the work of the ranch between them, and in doing so, they had given the man a gift he hadn't known he needed, the ability to focus, to breathe, to not have to be everywhere at once. One day, a truck came kicking up dust on the long driveway. It was the neighbor from a few miles over. He got out, his eyes wide as he took in the scene. Dogs lounging under the pine, one following Clara as she carried a basket of laundry, another sitting calmly by the man's side as he greased a gate hinge. What in the world? The neighbor asked, a grin spreading on his face. "You start a shelter out here?" The man stood up, wiping his hands on a rag. "You could say that," he said. "They just sort of applied for the job." The neighbor shook his head, marveling. He'd come to borrow a tool, but he stayed for 20 minutes, watching the easy way the animals moved with the people and the land. "You hear about that cougar over near the canyon?" the neighbor asked as he was leaving. "Got one of my goats last week. Been too nervous to let the kids play outside." "We haven't had a bit of trouble," the man said, and he realized it was the truth. He hadn't seen a single sign of the big cat since that one night. The pack's presence had redrawn the map of the territory, and every creature in the hills seemed to know it. The legend of the Lone Pine Ranch began to spread, but not in a loud way. It spread in quiet conversations at the feed store. "Asterisk, you see that place with all the dogs? They say a little girl fed a stray, and the whole pack moved in to protect them. They say you can't find a rat or a snake on the whole property." Asterisk, it became a story people told not quite believing it, but wishing it were true. For Clara, the change was in the silence. The lonely quiet that used to hang over the afternoon was gone, filled now with the soft sounds of life. The snore of a sleeping dog on the porch, the jingle of tags as Thorn got up to follow her, the feeling of a warm, heavy head resting on her foot as she read a book. She had a friend now, many friends, who asked for nothing but a bowl of water and a kind word, and gave back everything they had. The man built a better shelter before the winter winds. Came a proper three-sided shed with fresh straw on the floor. But he noticed the dogs still often chose to sleep under the open sky, on the blankets by the pine, or right outside the door to the house. They weren't boarders. They were home. One evening, near the end of a long golden summer day, the man and Clara sat on the porch. The dogs were scattered across the yard in their evening positions. The air was cool and sweet. The man looked at his daughter, then out at the land, the fences, the pine tree, the animals that guarded it all. "It doesn't feel so lone anymore, does it?" he said softly. Clara leaned against him, Thorn stretching out at her feet. "No," she said. "It just feels like Pine Ranch now." He put his arm around her. The sun dipped below the hills, painting the clouds in streaks of pink and orange. One by one, the dogs stood, stretched, and came to settle closer to the porch, a circle of content.